So how are the disciples that Jesus made different than the disciples that we're making today? Today I want to look at a story that we're very familiar with, that Jesus, when he fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And I want to look at it as a strategy for disciple making that Jesus left us as a model. The first thing you want to see is Jesus literally puts them into a predicament by asking them to give the crowd something to eat. The disciples come to him and they say, there's this crowd here, they're hungry, we're in a desert place, you need to send them away. And Jesus says to them, you give them something to eat. And one of the key strategies that we need to understand when we're making disciples is that we need to keep the assignment that God gave us, no matter how big it seems, how impossible it seems, we've got to keep it in front of our disciples at all times. And what Jesus gave us was we're to make disciples of all nations. So that's the first thing Jesus' disciples had that we don't do today. We don't have an assignment big enough to motivate us to move, right? So that's the first one. The second one is Jesus said, what do you have? He looks around and said, well, go find out what you got. And they go find that little boy. He's got 5 loaves. He's got 2 fishes. And they say, here's what we have. So they began the process of feeding these people with what they had. So everybody wants to get to the point where like they know all the Bible, they know all the stories, they can tell, backwards and forwards, they have all the answers, but you can't wait until you're ready to start. You really got to start where you're at. And the Great Commission literally says, begin, as it were in the Greek, begin to do this now. So as soon as you know what your assignment is, you begin the process, right? Don't wait till you're ready, because you'll never get fully ready. So that's another thing we've got to make sure of. So when you're meeting with a person and you're discipling them, you've got to say right now, immediately, you've begun this process. Now you've got to start with it right now. So here's the good news about this one. What's the third thing we need to think about? The third one is that the miracle of that reproduction is in the hands of Jesus. It says in the story that Jesus took the loaves, he blessed them, or blessed God for them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples. But it says he kept on breaking them and kept on giving them to the disciples. So the miracle of reproduction always stayed in the hands of Jesus. He didn't give them a basket full of bread and every time they reached in, it just kept multiplying. No, literally the multiplication of it happened from his hand. So the miracle of this process, the miracle of taking on the whole wide world, discipling the nations, the miracle of that, which seems like an overwhelming assignment to us, it is an overwhelming assignment to us. But we can trust that the miracle that Jesus has in reproduction is going to kick in if we trust him. Okay, so that's his part. His part is the miracle of reproduction. So what's my part? My part is to pass it on. My part is to take the bread from him and distribute it. So if I'm sitting down with a person in this process of disciple making, when they sit down in a chair, I'm not there just to teach them good truths. I'm there to literally teach them truths that they're to then capture and carry it on to the next man, to the next man, to the next man, to the ends of the earth, until the assignment has been fulfilled, making disciples of all nations. So we've got to pass on that responsibility to everyone we train. That's probably the biggest key point we miss in Christian ministry today, is we gather people around us and we teach them these truths, and they get smarter and they get more knowledgeable about the Bible, but they never assume they have any intention or any responsibility to do anything with it other than to listen to it. And so it stagnates and dies with them. It's like the manna in the back of their tent starting to stink and breed worms. So what's the last thing? Well, last thing, after this feeding is done, after this miracle is completed, Jesus says to the 12, go gather up the fragments that nothing be lost. So there's 2 ideas about this gathering up. One is that he fully expected them to capture the truths that he had literally broken that day, the things that he had opened their eyes to, the truth that he handed out, all the things he had taught that day. He expected them to get it. He expected them to capture these ideas in a way that they could remember them and repeat them. And what was the purpose of that? Well, because next time they go to a place and there needs to be a feeding happening, they have material to put in God's hands for the reproduction again to happen. So when I'm sitting under truth, I have a responsibility to not only just to listen to it, but to literally capture it down. In other words, get it in a way that I can repeat it for the next man that God has for me, for the next hungry person that's coming along. So if you're doing disciple making and you're not seeing movement out of your disciple making process, it's probably because of one of those 5 things. One is you've not taught your disciples the assignment, and it's got to be world impact. It's got to be world vision. It's got to be God-sized big. Otherwise, it won't motivate you to move. And 2 is you've got to start where you are. You can't wait You can't wait till you're ready. You can't wait till you have all the answers. You just got to start, right? Just like the little boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish, they took that and fed a multitude. And then third, you trust the process of reproduction, and the miracle of multiplication is at the hands of Jesus. But the distribution is on us. We've got to be responsible to take what we're getting, take what we're hearing, take what we're learning, and pass that on to the next man. And then make sure we're capturing every bit of truth that God's trying to give us, so that we can give it away, not just to show how smart we are and how much Bible we know, but to pass it on to the next hungry man, so he can pass it on to the one after that. So those are the 5 things I think that a lot of Christian ministries that are trying to make disciples, but if those key elements aren't there, generally those movements will stop. God bless.